Okay, if everybody can get seated, I think we're running a few moments late, so we'll get started and get into this pretty sharpish.
I'm going to say I'm going to be too sharp.
Thank you for all attending and the distinguished panel which we have. I think this is the third year in which I have chaired a panel of this sort on trade, and each time I opened by saying it's a minute to midnight. Well, it's been a very long minute. It's now 3 years old. I want to just tell you about a conversation I had with my 6.5-year-old daughter on Tuesday at breakfast. As my wife had asked me a question, was how often have I been to Davos? And I couldn't quite remember, but I said it's 15, maybe 20 times. And she said, are you still enthusiastic about it? Do you still think it achieved something? And I said, yes. And she said, when will you stop going? I said, I don't know, but at some stage it's appropriate to stop. It's no longer relevant. At which moment my daughter, who had been reading, who's 6.5, said, Daddy, what is Davos about? And I said, no, it's a 6.5-year-old, so I have to try and explain it in terms she'll understand. So I said, well, sweetheart, I said, it's, there are lots of problems in the world, and once a year, people from all around the world come together to discuss these problems and see if they can resolve some of them. So she looked at me and she said, well then, if there are so many problems to be resolved, you can never stop going to Davos. And I have to tell you, when it comes to trade, that is certainly my view. Let me give you a little bit of history. In his book, Global Capitalism, Jeffrey Friedman of Harvard University reminds us that the level of international economic integration today is remarkably similar to that of the early 20th century. Of course, the two great conflicts of the 20th century swept a lot of the infrastructure away, and we've really spent the last 60 years since the end of the Second World War building it back again. And boy, are we at this moment at a testing time in terms of that structure. Friedman also makes the argument to illustrate a wider point. He says globalization is a choice. It's a choice made by governments that consciously decide to reduce barriers to trade and investment, to adopt new policies towards international money and finance, and to chart fresh economic choices. Friedman reminds us the liberal economic order that has underpinned the economic growth of the post-war era and offers the best hope to lift millions out of poverty is not guaranteed by anyone. As in physics, there is no steady state. You move forward or you assuredly move backwards. And we again speculate whether this will be the year Doha is successfully concluded. And perhaps we should consider the following. Are we doing enough to counter protectionist rhetoric that all too often colours the national political debate? If not, do we need to remind ourselves of the benefits globalization and free and liberal trade brings to all? Protectionism, of course, can take many forms. It is sometimes disguised as concerns about national security, the safety of products made in China, and now, of course, the environment. All valid issues in their own right, but not immediately helpful to the immediate trade debate. The Doha Development Round, as we all know, began in 2001 in the aftermath of 9/11, and there was a great coming together and a real wish to move forward in terms of bringing the world back together. It was due to be completed on the 1st of January 2005, and since then it has been a story of deadlines made and deadlines missed. From the outside, just at this moment, the impression is of a sort of multi-dimensional chess game in which no player is prepared to make the first move, and therefore the game never starts, and therefore you end up in paralysis and failure. The current impasse is, it seems to me, at its simplest, about how much the developed world is willing to cut farm subsidies and how much the developing world will agree to reduce industrial and agricultural tariffs. And of course, there are the complex and sometimes very contradictory issues around the free flow of services. Last year, the International Business Council, which I chair, took the very unusual step of making a public collective statement in support of the Doha Development Round at Davos. And I'd like to remind you remind you, that is if you ever read it in the first instance, but to remind you of what the last paragraph of that said. It said, the next generation requires our collective vision and decisive leadership in the enlightened self-interest of all. Assertive efforts from all parties are essential. Failure will impact all citizens, and the leaders who fail them will be harshly judged. The members of the IBC wish to underline the responsibility of all decision makers and political leaders for relevant, constructive and timely action to deliver a successful Doha Round. We, that's the IBC, business group, stand ready to engage and participate in any way which will help. So that's where we left it a year ago. And one is tempted to say, here we are again. There's something I was saying earlier to one of the panel members, there's something about the spirit of Davos that there's always, just at this moment, it seems new hope and momentum. And then somehow it doesn't quite seem to survive the landing back in our various home countries in the cold light of a Monday morning. Something goes wrong, that spirit which was around. So let's hope that this time is the exception. What we're going to do is I'm going to ask questions of each of the panelists and then get a dialogue going, I hope, and then throw it open. And I want it to be as interactive as possible, so I'll try to get to you, the audience, as quickly as I can, because we all need to hear, and the panel members need to hear, your anxieties and what it is you really want to happen, and also want to hear. I think the time has finally just about run out. So Pascal, let me start with you. You've had meetings here. Last year there were similar sorts of meetings, and it led to the formal relaunch at the WTO of the negotiations. You said then, as I recall, that you would not call a ministerial meeting, or you would not be party to a ministerial meeting, to press for a deal until you felt that countries were closer to what you described as a landing zone. So the question really is, a year on, is the landing zone any closer? Would you be more confident trying to land this plane in the next few months?
Short answer is yes. I've stuck to what I said last year, which is before we have 20 or 30 ministers around the table to clinch a deal on the three main political elements, which are reduction of farm subsidies, reduction of farm tariffs, and reduction of industrial tariffs. Not that these are the only issue, but they are the gateway issues. I don't think we should do that before we are nearly there. Now, which we are much nearer to nearly there than last year. Why is it so? Simply because this terribly complex negotiation works by accumulation of details, compromises, creativity, numbers, words. And there's now a lot of that on the table. Not to the point where, to answer your question, Neil, I think we should do that tomorrow. But I think it's, let's say, something we will have to do in the season.
The season being?
Well, you know, the definition of a season depends on whether you are in clothing,
There's still only 4 in the year.
Latitude, media, but it's, you know, more weeks than months. That's the sort of time horizon. And why do I believe this is now doable, although not just tomorrow? Because I think the politics are globally right. We have the level of commitment, time horizon when we should do the deal, the whole deal, which is 08, and I think the technical ripeness is there. So I'm not saying they will do it. I'm not 100% confident about that, but I believe it's doable, and what we did with Doris at lunchtime has confirmed me in this view, which I got bilaterally from many members.
So would it be fair to say you're beginning to look at the landing gear and how you might begin to bring the landing gear down?
That's absolutely right, Neil, not least because I've just got a weather forecast, which leads me to believe that the plane had better be grounded.
Thank you. Peter, you've said you will fight to the last to get this round done, if for no other reason than to avoid a potential fatal blow to the multilateral trading system, which is indeed so close to the heart of the European Commission. You told Reuters in an interview in October that, and I quote, "I will be proclaiming the importance and doability of this round if I am the last person standing." Against that background, how close to a fatal blow is the multilateral trading system, particularly if this round is not concluded in this year?
If it's not concluded this year, my fairly settled view is that it will not be concluded next year, and if it's not concluded next year, I believe that by the following year, 2010, the caravan or the caravans would have moved on elsewhere. So we are, in a sense, the prisoners of the US political calendar, because the reason for my settled view is that I just don't think it is at all likely that an incoming US president in January 2009 is going to have the Doha development agenda top of their in-tray, top of their agenda, if we haven't done it this year. Inevitably, they have to appoint a new USTR, just as in time later on in 2009 they'll be appointing a new European Trade Commissioner. USTRs take about 6 months to find, appoint, nominate and have confirmed at the outside. That USTR, along with other trade ministers and commissioners, will be wanting to review their options. They're not going to pick it up immediately where it was left off in 2008. We're talking about 2010. And my view is that not only will the caravans have moved on in different directions of trade negotiation, but what's already on the table, what has already been negotiated, which in my view is quite substantial, will, having been put in the deep freeze this year, if we don't get a breakthrough, will have turned to mush by 2010. It won't be in a state just to sort of pick up and carry forward. Now, you could also say, therefore, that we're not so much prisoners of the US political calendar so much as seeing the US political calendar quite possibly as a source of liberation for us this year. Because as Celso Amorim said at lunchtime, and just to sort of quote him before he gets his own quote in first, because it was such a good quote and I'm so envious of it, I've decided to use it before he has the opportunity to deploy it.
If you pay copyright, it's fine with me. You know?
Well, we're all great supporters of TRIPS, but what he said was last year was, you know, the year of opportunity, the window of opportunity. There, I'm quoting him wrongly already. Was the window of opportunity. If that was last year, this year, it is the window of necessity. And I think that is a very good summing up of it. And we can use, therefore, that pressure of the US political calendar to bring people together, to show the cooperation, the flexibility. Doesn't mean to say that everything, by the way, has to be done by the United States to bring this round to a conclusion. Absolutely not. You know, we have all got responsibilities. We all have to shoulder our fair share of the burden of bringing this round to an end, and there's going to be a lot of heavy lifting in it for all of us. And it's ministers' job to do that. But now let me just say this. If we do it, it will be one in the eye for the protectionists. It will be one up for free markets. It will be one up for trade-led development strategies, and it will be one up for the multilateral system. Plus, 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 and plus. And that's why, in my opinion, it's so important to get this done this year.
Thank you, Peter. That's very clear. Kamal, Nath, also in October last year, you explained that although Doha is within reach, sensitivities in India's case on agriculture must be addressed. Specifically, you said, and I quote, if these sensitivities are not taken on board, then India would not be able to exercise flexibilities as we have done in other cases. But at the same time, I'm now not quoting you anymore, at the same time, openness in services, of course, is vitally important to India, particularly in IT and perhaps in textiles. So my question for you is, how do you reconcile these two positions?
When we talk of India's sensitivities, we don't talk of any structural flaw, which is the object of this round, which, as you said, started in 2001, and we call it the development round. And the development round means not perpetuating the structural flaws. So I'm not talking of structural flaws when we talk of sensitivities. Sensitivities in India's case is not commerce. Sensitivities in others' cases is commerce. In India's case, sensitivity is livelihood security. And the object of this round, if we are talking, if the Business Council is talking, politicians are talking, we ourselves are talking, we want to complete this. In the morning I was asked after Doris's meeting, which for the last several years we have these ministerial meeting in Davos, and we come out and we say, we are going to complete this round this year. So this time I came out and I said that we are going to complete this round this year, and I promise you I won't say it next year. It's only because I think that there is greater understanding of these sensitivities. I can negotiate commerce, but I cannot negotiate livelihood security. It's as simple as that. And the object of this round for the business community, for the world's business leaders, whether they are from the north or from the south, for governments, for politicians, has to be one: to have healthy economies in developing countries, because that's where the markets of the developed countries are going to be. If India didn't have a healthy economy, I don't think I would have been even invited to Davos. Forget about being a market. So really what one should be looking at, the content of this round must deliver towards healthy economies in Asia, in Africa, in the Pacific, in Latin America, and because that's the goose which is going to lay the golden egg in the future. It's already doing so.
Okay, that's very clear. I'm not going to go to Celso or Amorim. I need to just make clear he has to leave early. So I don't want you to feel that after I've asked him the question he's answered and he's left, that it was because my question was too rude.
I still have some minutes.
Yeah. So Brazil has often put political alliances with other developing countries ahead of its own trade interests. And this puts you potentially in a position of taking your negotiating stance to the lowest common denominator of your Mercosur allies or the G20 group. If you were negotiating only on your own behalf, i.e. Brazil, would you offer further concessions? Does the political return from such alliances compensate for the lack of progress in opening new markets?
I'll try to give a quick answer to that. Anyway, I mean, first of all, in the case of Mercosur, it's more than just political alliance or casual political alliance. It's a process of integration the same way as you had in Europe. I mean, for us it's a question of peace and stability in South America, which for us is absolutely crucial. So I think that has to come first anyway. It's not a question of expediency here or there, but let us put that aside. And I don't think this will be a big problem, because after all, the interests of Brazil are not so different from the interest of Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. And so this is not really the main question. On the second aspect that you have also, I'm not answering directly your question, but I think I'm giving you food for thought at least. The second aspect is that if it is universally, I would say, recognized that the G20 played a very constructive role all along. And actually many of the proposals that have been made, very often by chairmen of groups or even by other countries, they said, no, we are basing ourselves on the G20 proposal because the G20 is the middle of the road. Everyone knows, and Kamal has just said, the sensitivities that countries like India have in agriculture, and the offensive interests that countries like Brazil or Argentina have in agriculture. I think that really I would not say the miracle because I don't believe in miracles, but the great architectural work of the G20 was put these people together, put these countries together, put these interests together, and see what is the most detrimental thing in world trade: subsidies. As I said last year, if we did in industry what the rich countries still do in agriculture, we would not be taken only to dispute settlement, we would be in jail. So, having said that, let me just mention one or two aspects. You mentioned two things that I think are of great interest. You reminded us that the Doha Development Round was launched just after the September 11th. Now, thanks God, we don't face the same kind of tragic event, but we do face similar events in terms of the economic effects. And I hope this is a moment which will bring on every one of us, and include myself, but everything has to be proportionate, but we bring to every one of us the sense of urgency in bringing this thing to a conclusion now. Not because of the US election, I agree with what Peter said, because that creates constraints and so on, but mainly because if we don't do so, we are going to give the wrong signals to the world economy, and these will be really detrimental to everyone, and most of all to the developing countries. Now, last point. You summarized the main problems or the main issues in the negotiation, and of course, all summary, of course, is always a caricature, but I don't want to quarrel with that, because I think, by and large, you're right. But one has to take into account, when we go to this final stage, that there are proportionalities in all that. The poorest of all don't have to do anything. They just have to benefit. I mean, if you take the LDCs, many small countries, don't ask them anything. They will have to benefit. The countries like Brazil or India or Argentina, they have to do something, but they cannot be expected to do at the same level or at the same proportion as we expect from the United States and from Europe or Japan, for that matter, or even Australia, for that matter. So if I would just say what we need now, I would agree with Pascal. We have a window of necessity, which is also a window of opportunity. And we can do it. But we do need something which is essential now. And I try to define that today as a balance of negotiating space. The way the texts were construed, the text of agriculture has many loopholes, many gray areas which are still to be negotiated. The text on NAMA, in which we have sensitivities, was written in a way almost as if it were, I mean, again, it's a caricature, but almost as if it were the final thing. So there must be a balance, I'm not saying even of the result at this stage, but a balance of negotiating space. And if we have that, I'm sure with flexibility on all sides, we can bring to a conclusion. If you allow me, I was, unlike most of you, I believe, except Pascal, on a different capacity, I was in Cancun. And just after Cancun, everybody thought that it was a disaster that would never come to anything. 6 months later, we came to the July framework, which was the basis for everything that we have done so far. So if we have our minds not only on our national interest, of course we have to have our national interest, but also on the system, I think it's possible to conclude.
Thank you, Celso. Susan, you said on many an occasion that you don't like artificial deadlines. But in reality, we can't get away from the US political calendar. It is what it is. The election will take place. There will be a new administration. Fast track expired last July. There is now a democratically controlled Congress, and that's not taking a political view, it's just a fact, and it seems to be one which makes it more difficult to get trade deals through from recent experience. So is it really conceivable that a complex Doha package could be got through the US Congress? And if it is, what is the latest that package needs to be agreed to give you the time to get it through that Congress?
Basically, the answer is yes, and I'll start with the level of commitment, which is very clear commitment on the part of the Bush administration to see the successful conclusion of the Doha Round in 2008. And we recognize that, as Peter and others have said, the United States can't deliver a successful Doha Round by ourselves. The nature of the consensus process in the WTO requires that no individual or group of countries stand in the way of consensus. So it's easy to kill a Doha Round. But we've made the commitment that we will make the contribution we need to make. We will go to whatever length to see a successful outcome, a good package. What is a good package? And that relates to the politics. We've had a lot of discussion about trade promotion authority. Other countries' way of dealing with trade promotion authority is to say, oh, it's too politically sensitive, I just can't do it. I mean, gosh, there are a lot of my trading partners I wish had trade promotion authority because their alternative is just to say no. We have that commitment, and we believe that with a good modalities outcome, and here we get into WTO speak, and I apologize to everybody in the room, but we're talking about a two-step process here that Pascal can describe better than I can. But initially, you need modalities, which is our way of saying that the fundamental framework that allows us to write up our tariff schedules so that we can exchange tariff schedules and negotiate on the basis of those schedules, so that we can, in the case of agriculture and manufacturing, do those schedules, negotiate the finality of those schedules. And in the case of services, that will lay the groundwork for new sets of offers because we're using a so-called request to offer process for that negotiation. If that is done in a timely manner, then there is enough room in the calendar year to conclude these negotiations. And for us to go back to Capitol Hill to seek trade promotion authority, and the leadership of the Senate Finance Committee, of the House Ways and Means Committee are on record, the Democratic leadership as well as the Republicans, are on record saying if we get a good breakthrough in the Doha Round, they will work with us on trade promotion authority. The key is getting an outcome that is robust and ambitious and that will actually have an impact on development. And there you have to be talking about new trade flows. You have to be talking about real disciplines on trade distorting subsidies, whether it's domestic ag subsidies or farm export subsidies. And you need to be talking about coming into that level of balance that will allow a democracy to debate the nature of the outcome. But development, to generate development, you need to generate economic growth, and to do that you need new trade flows. And the only way you get new trade flows is you have to cut into applied trade barriers. That's what the debate is about. Not just developed countries, but the advanced developing countries. Not as much as the developed countries have to do, but commensurate with their level of development. At that stage of the game, if you talk to any Democrat, any Republican, the notion that 152 countries could come together and converge on a round that is, as you said, a three-dimensional chess game that has real potential to help economic development, particularly in developing countries, and alleviate poverty, that is a very compelling case to make on Capitol Hill. Now, one caveat, if I may. The nature of our capacity, and indeed the capacity of any one of us up here, to deliver such a package politically through our own political systems will depend in very large measure on what the private sector is doing and saying, and whether the private sector is holding accountable not just their negotiators, but the leaders in each of these countries and the politicians in each of these countries. And for those who've complained that somehow agriculture has held up the works for all these years, there's a reason for that. Perhaps the agricultural lobbies in each country are more compelling than the services lobbies or the manufacturers' lobbies. And so all of us have a responsibility, but that's a long-winded way of saying, yes, it's doable, and it's doable within 2008.
Does this rank sufficiently highly with the President's that if there was a package which in your view was deliverable, that he would use his political capital in Congress?
Absolutely.
And is it something in which he would engage with the sense of urgency that would be required?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there have been a lot of questions this week, many questions raised about, in the context of turbulence in the global economy, threats of protectionism, economic isolationism, economic retrenchment. We've seen just this week the bipartisan coming together, the President and the Democratic Republican leadership in the Congress in a economic growth package. There have been a lot of questions raised about statements made by individuals running for office. Well, the Democratic Party is the party of John F. Kennedy, and we named an entire multilateral trading round after John F. Kennedy. And I've heard many of my Democratic colleagues talk about that legacy and the priority they place on it. But yes, absolutely, President Bush is fully committed to seeing a successful outcome to the Doha Round in 2008.
Thank you. Doris, Switzerland has one of the most protected agricultural sectors. I mean, that's a matter of fact. At the same time, you would benefit greatly from greater access to services, particularly financial services. Do you believe the benefits of protecting agriculture outweigh all of the great benefits of a more liberal services regime?
Well, Switzerland, like our group in G10, like our Japanese colleagues, we have the same problem that we are net importers from agricultural products. So therefore, we really need a balanced result, and we are also willingly to contribute and adapt our system in agriculture. That's what we did on national level, and I think we will contribute also to do more in agriculture to cut tariffs. This is clear. But as you mentioned, at the end, it's not what Switzerland wants. We need a balanced result. Every nation has another economy, every nation has other sensibilities. So therefore, the balanced outcome is really the key point. And the longer we negotiate and don't come to a result, we lose credibility. Credibility that our economy thinks, well, they are frustrated, they don't believe us anymore, that we have the political will to show flexibility and that market access for services is possible also in economies where, well, they have other interests. And on the other side, when we don't get to a result, national protectionism is really a problem we face, not only in Switzerland, in other countries. So therefore, we have a big responsibility, really come to an end, and not only talking and sitting here also next year, but really to have the awareness we are at the point either we fail or we really contribute more, but everybody, not only industrialized countries, not only countries which have protectionism, be it in agriculture, be it in service products, be it on market access for industrial products. So therefore, this meeting today showed me it's possible. The political will is here. We have to get leadership, also from Pascal. I think he overviews best all sensitivities from every member, and therefore let's try really this year not only talking, negotiating, really to prove that it's possible. And our private sector really has to give us a support, because every minister in his country, he will be attacked from one sector which will lose. So we need support, that at the end we are not blamed and shamed, that really the profit from the world economy is here, that we can integrate the poor countries in the world economy, and that the Doha Round may also contribute to a stability in world economy, which will be necessary in this year with the financial crisis we face.
By the way, just as a matter of personal observation, I don't think, if there's a failure to complete this year, I don't think you'd be having a discussion like this next year. I don't think you'd get anybody to turn up for it, and you certainly wouldn't get anybody to chair it. because at that point credibility would have been lost completely. Simon, as chairman of the Cairns Group of agricultural exporters, are the prospects of getting a deal on Doha which represent a meaningful cut in agricultural subsidies, are those prospects real? And if I could twin it with another question, my very good friend and fellow countryman Peter Sutherland, who of course has form on the subject of trade, has said quite recently that it was probably a mistake to put agriculture up front in the way it was, and that more progress would have been made if, for instance, liberalisation of financial services had been seen as the, or of services, not financial services, as the first area for negotiation.
Yes, I'm not too sure I share that view. I think agriculture is the key, and of course that's what does bind the Cairns Group. So far as my own country is concerned, of course, we want ambition through all the sectors. But agriculture holds the key, and if as a result of the discussions that we've had today, not just the lunch but the other session this morning, it gives me optimism that the outcome is doable. I might say that when you look at the economic environment in which we operate, and there is a lot of uncertainty, and that is a big difference from where Davos sat this time last year as well, I think it is incumbent upon us, given that so much effort has been put in over the years, so much stock, so much negotiating, so much understanding as to where the problems are, that it's almost as if the political will hopefully has been given a kickstart by the uncertainty, because this is an area in which certainty can be introduced. And I do believe that, and I've heard your comments about where does it go from here, and that we've been here, there before in similar circumstances here, but I think that the twin circumstance of the difficulties within the economic environment, plus the high food prices, this I think is another imperative in terms of addressing agriculture. And if I can also make this observation, if countries really are looking to how they can secure their sustainability in the future, whether they're developed, whether they're developing, the facts are, without a multilateral success story so far, the growth in world trade over the last 5 years has been twice the rate of growth of world output. If nations really want to secure their future, then continuing to liberalise and open up the trade opportunities gives them the best chance by a long way. And that's where I think collectively we have to understand the importance of overcoming the differences and clinch the deal. So I don't think that the order is the wrong way about. We all understand the importance of getting a successful and ambitious outcome in agriculture, because without it we won't get there with NAMA, and if we don't get those two running in parallel, we won't be opening up the other areas, particularly services. And we've got a very strong interest in the financial services, the one that you mentioned. So I think let's not try and play around with the order. The die in many senses was cast in Hong Kong for that. Let's not try and play around with it. Let's just get the outcome.
Let me ask the panellists, any who wish to answer it, a more general question. One of the things that has intrigued me, as somebody who looks at this from a business perspective, is that if you go back to the Uruguay round, those who were very intimately involved in that would say that business played a critical role. The pressure which business applied, particularly towards the end, for the Uruguay round to be completed. Certainly my observation is that business has been almost absent from the discussion this time. Yes, statements are made from time to time, and yes, there are individuals, myself included, I suppose, who believe passionately that business should be involved. But in general, there has been a lack of engagement of business. Has that, in your view, been a significant factor, and has it, if business, even at this last moment, at this 59th minute, were to get much more actively engaged, would that help you as negotiators? Celso?
Yeah, I can venture. I was there in the Uruguay round, so I suffered some of these pressures, whether positive or not positive anyway. I think it's true that the business played a much greater role. I think, to reply to your questions, not necessarily in the order, I think it can play a bigger role now if it understands that it's also not for specific sectors only, but because of the systemic importance that it has in terms of growth in the world economy and so on. But I also have an explanation, if you allow me, and that's a bit polemic, on why that happened in the Uruguay round, it doesn't happen now. Because the main purposes or the main objectives of the business, I mean, speaking by and large, by the business community, was obtained in the Uruguay round. I mean, the markets of developing countries were by and large open. I mean, if you compare tariffs in India and Brazil then, either in the course of the negotiations or unilaterally. The services sectors in most of our countries were by and large open, so it's no wonder that there's not such a pressure now. However, I do think that the systemic view is of great importance, and I think the business community would be working in its own behalf and on behalf of the system as a whole if it would put more pressure now. But I was encouraged by the meeting I was this morning, in which there were several people of the business community, and they said that precisely what they intend to do at this moment, because the threat of a failure may maybe awaken this spirit of the need to finalize and to conclude successfully.
Thank you. Pascal?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact is absolutely right. I lived through the two rounds, and there is a big difference. Two reasons, in my view. First, big business, multinationals, organized business, which influences politicians, which is big business, sorry to say that so bluntly, is much more globalized than it used to be 20 years ago. Technology, international division of labor, the results of the Uruguay round have led to a situation where for many corporates, if you have a problem jumping a frontier, you just localize your production differently. It's much more flexible. So it's less important for big business, which is organized. It's much more important for small business, which is not that well organized. Second reason, I think business at large has understood that public opinion today was less sort of trade prone than it was 20 years ago. And this has a reverberation on their public behavior because of consumers, because of shareholders, because of your PR department saying, should you really, stick your neck out of the window if you get tomatoes not looking good on the photos? And it's a political reality which we have to factor in. But I think business also knows that now, at this stage of the negotiation, the big thing is not the final push. The big thing will be, how do you get the results of the negotiation ratified where the deal will have to be ratified? They've understood that. They're anticipating this. They know what public opinion is like, and they're keeping their powder dry. And that's, I think, also one of the reasons why, they're not spending that much time or money, because at the end of the day, that's what it means for business. They keep a bit of that in a reserve. And I believe if I were them, that's what I would do.
I would be personally reassured if I thought the thinking was quite as rational as you describe it. I don't think it is. Peter?
2 points. One is that I think that a lot of business representatives have looked at the course of the negotiations and have not only felt frustrated by the length of time they're taking, but have also felt that during the negotiations the level of ambition has fallen, and therefore they believe, I believe quite wrongly, that there's less in it for them than there might otherwise be if there was greater ambition. The reason I think this is the wrong judgment to apply to this round is because although we want to see new market openings, we want to create new market access as a result of this round, and I believe that we will. But there is also a very significant economic value of binding the existing openness in the global economy. And I say that particularly now with some protectionist sentiments growing in different parts of the world. If you bind the openness that you have, then you're putting in place an insurance policy against those protectionist pressures getting traction amongst politicians and governments and forcing the global economic machine backwards. And therefore I think it's very important to bear in mind the economic value for business of putting a ratchet in place and stopping the backward slide of that global economic machine. Second point, though, I'd make is this. I have been struck recently by two encounters with business representatives who've said to me, please do everything you can on Europe's behalf to bring this round to a successful conclusion. Please show determination. Please don't give up. This is really, really important. But if during the course of this year you judge that this round is not going to come together, don't let it linger on. Give it a decent burial. But in the process, extract something of value from what you've already negotiated, for example, trade facilitation or development package for the least developed economies in the world. See what you can do to extract those components, those elements that are cooked, that have economic value, which it would be criminal to sacrifice. Now, I don't know whether that would be possible, I have to say, in the circumstances of a burial of this round. And frankly, I'm rather sceptical about the likelihood of our success in sort of rescuing or cherry-picking key elements of it. But I have been struck by those business representatives who have said to me on two occasions now in the last couple of months, don't let it linger on. I mean, if you believe it's not going to come together this year, then put a full stop, you and your colleagues, something which I think heads of government will be very reluctant to do incidentally, but I'm just repeating what I've been told, so that we can then pursue other avenues of trade negotiation for the future. I put it on record for what it is worth.
Susan, in the US, I mean, when business has a clear view and when it articulates it in a very forthright way, politicians tend to listen. That is the system. Why is it not happening?
The first reason is the understandable one, which is the business people who are here, you talk to, they're looking at, if we're lucky, quarterly returns, looking at daily stock market movements, and we're in our 6th year of negotiating a trade agreement that may or may not come together. It shouldn't surprise us that a lot of folks are not paying attention at this point in time. But absent a natural deadline, part of what we have to do in this negotiating process is generate our own traction, generate our own momentum, and build to a point where there is enough focus to get a chance at a breakthrough, to get a chance at making this real. And we are on a path right now, and a lot of work's been done behind the scenes in the last 6 months, very technical work, expert level work, that I think will serve us very well. This needs to become real for the business community. So I think if we get a breakthrough in modalities in the next several weeks and months, agriculture, manufacturing, services, areas where businesses can start to see some potential tangible benefits, then I think everyone will wake up and start paying attention. Right now, the only folks who are paying attention are those with defensive interests, not with offensive interests or ambitions. I would add one other thing, which is in my conversations with American CEOs about this topic, I do raise this topic. And I raise the issue of accountability. I ask them if they care so much about trade, when they go in and visit their congressional representative, where does trade show up on their list of topics? Is it before or after taxes? Before or after regulatory issues? Don't think for a minute that the member of Congress doesn't get a sense of what the priority being conveyed is. So that's one point. And the last point I make is, and this has to do with the broader issue associated with trade politics, to what extent is a corporate executive certain that his or her employees understand at this point the importance of free and fair trade, open trade, to their own paychecks, their own jobs, their own livelihood? And you would be amazed at the number of corporate executives who say, well, you know, I think if we polled my people, they'd understand. But only a handful of you actually have proactive approaches to your own employees so that they get a sense of how incredibly important trade is to your own P&L.
Yeah. Thank you, Susan. Kamal?
The issues this time were different to the Uruguay round. I think the Uruguay round was addressing the most major issues where business, but directly impacting business most of all, when you saw the great persuasion which the business community not only did in their own countries, but to other countries, was TRIPS, was the multi-fiber agreement. I was textile minister at that time. And there was much more engagement, and you're right when you say that, much more engagement at that time of the business community. This time, it's less, but I wouldn't say it's absent. In the last 3 days here, at least 10 times, I've been asked, is this round going to end this year? Business associations in the United States, business associations in Europe have raised this issue, visiting India. And I also think that the way to persuade and the way to conduct lobbying has changed. Now you'll see a business delegation from the United States, Europe come to India and have discussions, say what's the problem, what's happening. They're writing letters to us. This was not so free and open in the past. We never had this when, at least in India's case, our economic engagement with the global economy was not so much. Now it's become, the manner has become different. But when we talk of the business, which business are we talking about? We see industry, services, and we are stuck on agriculture. One of the major issues, headline issues, is agriculture. I've not had anyone come and talk to me from the business community. When they come and talk to me, I say, what about agriculture? What about the subsidies? They privately tell me, yeah, we know that is bad. And whether it's from Europe or whether it's from the United States. That's industry, manufacturing, services, where they want to open up, and I think it's very important. Undoubtedly, we should move forward in that. Susan put it rightly, that the defensive interests have been much more to the fore rather than the offensive interests.
Okay, let's open it up to the audience. Questions, sir? And could I ask you, please, we have 15 minutes to keep them as questions rather than statements. That will always help. Then I can bring it back quickly for answers to the panel.
Thank you very much, Jean-Pierre Lehman at Evian Group. I think development is key. You said agriculture is key, development is key. I think if the business community can be convinced of what you're saying, the necessity of a healthy developing economy, they understand that. And this is the point that I think has to get across. This is the Doha development round. I think this is often forgotten. I have made the point several times that I believe that Doha is dead, brain dead. And I think it's part of the problem has been very bad PR in terms of selling it. Now I think if we're saying this is the last year, the year of necessity, could the panel perhaps spell out what are the costs of non-Doha?
Okay. Cost of non-Doha. Pascal, cost of non-Doha.
Yeah. Jean-Pierre Lehmann knows I totally disagree with him on his point that this round should have been like the previous round, and that adding this development political dimension was the wrong thing to do. I totally disagree with that. We have to adjust to the geopolitics of this planet. And WTO is one of the international organizations where the repositioning of geo-economic, hence geopolitical forces can take place, not least because our institutional arrangements are fairly flexible, and it was time to do that. Now, what's the cost of a non-round? First, removing from the table what's on the table today. And that's a lot. Go and ask the chair of the least developed countries in WTO. Go and ask the chair of the African group in the WTO. Go and ask the chair of the ACP group in WTO. What would a failure of the round mean for them? And they will answer you extremely bad news. And those are the ones who basically need the good news. So there is a sort of economic impact. I'm not talking about the weather forecast, which we mentioned a moment ago, which in the present turbulences, sending a negative signal on the sort of regulating the real economy would mean in terms of the world economic outlook. So there are economic trade consequences. Loss of growth. Loss of growth is more poverty, assuming growth is redistributed in a way that makes it result in poverty reduction, which is beyond the WTO remit. Probably more important than that, geopolitical consequences. If there is too much resistance to this rearrangement of positions around the table, which have to come from trade-offs, they just don't come from goodwill because it's a negotiating area, this will have consequences beyond trade. And I don't think we live on a planet that can afford this sort of tensions. When we have an occasion to reduce these tensions, to narrow the difference, to frame a sort of new balance of forces through the negotiation, we have to do it, and if we don't do it, it's not going to be free in purely political terms.
Question here.
Question for Mr. Mandelson. If I understood well, you mentioned that the caravan would move in other directions if you don't finish this year. Which would be that directions, and which would be the consequences for the multilateral system?
The caravans.
Caravans, yes.
Not caravan. The caravans
Caravans.
would be the pursuit of bilateral country-to-country, region-to-region trade negotiations, which I believe can be justified, can complement the multilateral trade system, can even strengthen it. I think it can help. They can help stimulate further openness, economic reform, restructuring of economies of those that greatly need them. I think those agreements can exert a benign external influence. But do I think that they are a substitute for or an acceptable alternative to the multilateral trade negotiations? No, I do not. No, I do not. And those are the caravans that I'm talking about.
Good question here. Mike, please.
Thank you. Madhur Bajaj from India. It's very fortunate that everybody seems to be optimistic. Everybody is praying for the success of the Doha round. But as somebody said, people are waiting for the other person to make the first move. And that is perhaps leading to a kind of paralysis. May I suggest, Mr. Lamy, that you, as the CEO of WTO, you know the various thought processes of countries and wishes and dreams and so on. If you can make a package which you think is reasonable, covering all the countries, all your members, and then put it on the table, would that lead to success? Because then people can tinker about, allow them to tinker about a little bit, and then perhaps that could, lead to some kind of success. And my second point is, if it doesn't lead to success, as you said, that countries will stray if 2008 doesn't take place. Mr. Fitzgerald, you said that. In that case, what will happen? The bilaterals will come to the fore, and if more and more bilaterals take place and groupings take place, won't that be leading closer to the success of the multilateral round?
Before Pascal answers, just add an extra dimension to that question. One of the things which was an important moment in the Uruguay round, which was described by some as the nuclear option, was the Dunkel draft, when indeed he brought together many things and said, here's what I think it should be. So really, Pascal, the question for you is whether it's time to knock heads together with the Lamy list.
Well, first, I'm not the CEO of WTO. I was the CEO of a corporate in business at the time, and I can tell you there's a huge difference. Which basically is, you got more responsibility and less authority, which doesn't make life easier. But WTO, as all my sister organizations in the international system, is a member-driven organization. Now, I remember a former deputy DG in WTO who was a very good caricaturist, and his name was Andrew Stoller. Maybe he is here today. And he offered me a caricature which he made some years ago, where you can see a tree, a car which is totally crashed into the tree, and there is a panel on the car, and it's written member-driven car. Now, that's the reality, and that's the institutional reality, and we have to live with that. Now, does that mean that I have no influence on the negotiation? I hope not. At least the reason why I'm in this business is because I believe I may help. Maybe it's an illusion, we'll see. But what I can do is listen, confess, bark, midwife, conduct. I mean, a variety of things which are defined nowhere, but which basically is sort of a facilitator. Should I put my own compromise on the table? It's a possibility I have never excluded. I just observed that in 60 years of age of this negotiation, it only happened once. And the DG of WTO who did that was the GATT at the time. I had a long discussion with him before he passed away 2 years ago. He wasn't really advising me to do that. Now, does this mean that we have no compromise text on the table? No. We now have compromise text on the table, which are tabled by the chairs of the various negotiating groups. Sorry to enter into the details, but true, it took us 6 years before the WTO members, they are there, accepted that the chairs of the negotiating groups in agriculture, in industrial tariff, in anti-dumping, were empowered to table compromise text. Now, the minute they've done that, they've been cannoned by everywhere. They've survived. The texts are on the table. So please understand that while this process is working, and they've taken the flak, I keep a bit of distance. Now, if it was necessary, if I at some stage had the sort of conviction that if I don't do that, then the round will die, I'll do it. But we're not yet there, and it's a medicine, the impact of which on the patient is still debated by highly competent academic medical authorities.
Pascal, you've shown a degree of, or expressed a degree of humility about your own ability to influence, which puts you in a completely new light for me. I've not seen that side of you before. Have we got any other questions? At the back, lady.
Hello, I'm Stephanie Radazako of the Geneva Business Roundtable, and we have been following this for 6 years with you, and I think you don't get a lot of credit off it, and there's not a lot of positive feedback, but we would like to say thank you. We know that a lot of hard work has gone into getting where we are today, and we recognize that. My quick question has to do with implementation. I have been in some discussions this week where people are looking to Doha to try and stave off a recession in 2008. When would you say that we would start to see results in a post-Doha environment? What can economists and businesses expect in that? Thank you.
And that's Peter, Susan?
I mean, obviously it all depends on the content and how quickly we get it done, but I would say in terms of confidence building measures, in terms of confidence building, presumably you get a kick right from the beginning. I mean, as soon as it looks as though this is actually going to happen and we have a deal and it's a good deal and it's going to generate some growth, you'll have that psychological impact. And boy, if this past couple weeks tells us anything, psychological impact counts. In terms of substantive impact, actual impact on growth rates, economic development, we're stymied by the fact, well, first of all, we don't know what's going to be in the agreement. And as I was commenting earlier, an agreement that just sort of freezes everything in place is obviously not going to generate new trade flows. We feel very strongly that unless you're generating new trade flows in manufacturing, in services, in agriculture, that you're not likely to be generating a whole lot of new economic growth and have the development impact that I think all of us want out of this round. One World Bank study pinned a $142 billion number on it. Pascal knows better than I do. But for those of you, those of you who are practicing economists, you know that all the models we deal with are static models. They're not dynamic models. And I believe very strongly, I started out my career as a development economist, we drastically understate the positive benefits of trade liberalization in terms of our ability to generate statistics and the multiplier effects and the effects on competitiveness and productivity and innovation. So in terms of timing, it really is a question of how fast does the deal get closed and then get implemented. I mean, you're talking, you've gotten a glimpse today of agriculture, manufacturing, services. There are, 8 other negotiating, we talked about trade facilitation, rules, duty-free, quota-free, aid for trade. There is a magnificent set of environment-related provisions that we're negotiating. One, to try to eliminate or at least discipline subsidies to overfishing in the world's oceans. We have proposals on the elimination of tariff and non-tariff barriers on environmental goods and services, clean climate technologies. I mean, there are a whole range of elements that don't get a whole lot of press because we're stuck with, hung up on the formulas. But I think at the point that we're able to implement, you're talking about a real impact.
Ernesto?
Thank you. Ernesto Cedillo, Professor of International Economics at Yale University, and I served the government of Mexico in various capacities before. And this is a comment, and I would like to have your reaction, Minister Nath. And I have to start by saying that indeed it has been the responsibility of rich countries that things have moved so slow in this round. And I fully agree that developing countries and the Kearns group must keep the pressure until real results are delivered in the various parts of the round, and especially on agriculture. And I commend you for having been one of the leaders in that effort. But having said that, I respectfully observe that once the rich guys have done their job, and I think they are still short of doing it, India has to stop being so defensive in this round. I respectfully believe that this argument that because a country is poor has to be more protectionist is not really a very persuasive argument. I think that one of the objectives of the round certainly was to dismantle rich countries' protectionism, which is so damaging. But it's also true that one objective of the round was to obtain the opening of developing countries for their own sake. So once that is achieved, the first part, I hope that India becomes a leader among developing countries and have an attitude for a larger and more significant opening of its market.
Thank you, Mr. Kamal.
Well, if we are talking about industrial goods, what has the last 10 years shown where India is concerned? A unilateral reduction of tariffs. Our tariffs were 100% when we started, 60, 80%. Today we are on 7.5, 10, and 5%. Unilaterally, I didn't have to. If we did this deal 2 years ago, I would have done it because of an agreement. But I did not wait for an agreement, and it was pocketed. So now we start from where we are, as you know this. Where agriculture is concerned, what have we been saying? You're talking about trade flows, or we're talking about subsidy flows? Okay. Now, if there are going to be these billions of dollars of trade distortion, and you're going to talk at the same time of trade flows fueled by, in an environment of trade distortion, are we talking of free trade or are we talking of fair trade? And for India, it's not a market, it's not a question of market access, which I've repeatedly said. We are a country perhaps which imported the most amount of wheat last year. At what tariff? 0. We imported the largest amount of lentils. What tariff? 0. We are the biggest importers. Our imports have gone up, are going up by more than 30% with the United States. Susan will bear me out on that, with the European Union, their exports to India have gone up. So it's not that we're looking for market access. We're looking for more market access, more than 30% per year. My exports aren't going up 30%, but my imports are going up 30%. Why are my imports going up 30%? Because I'm a healthy economy. I could import 5 million tons of wheat because we could pay for it. I can import so much more because I have $270 billion in foreign exchange reserves. So when I keep repeating that we need healthy economies, what are we seeing in Africa? All the African countries, whenever I sit with them, they say, we've been deindustrialized, we brought our tariffs down, no industries come, no investment has come. And there are classic examples today. In fact, all of us have this great advantage because there has been now 11 years of the Doha Round. To really do a postmortem and see that liberalization has been good and in areas where we faltered. We have this, we can do this postmortem, and this completely demonstrates that what non-calibered liberalization can do. India's own reform policy succeeded because we calibrated it. We calibrated it. That was an India-specific model. We didn't have any bubble bursting like in South America or Central America, or we didn't have any Asian crisis. We rode over the Asian crisis So we are not protectionist. And I agree with you entirely that being protectionist today in industry, in services, is not necessarily good. And the more open we are, I'm one of those who've been urging within my own government that we need to open up so many more sectors. In services, we need to do this. I was just with one of the corporations today, and I told him, well, I'm on your side, I don't know why you're meeting me. I don't know if he's here, but I said that I am on your side. And I also told them that in my WTO process in services, I'm going to use that to open up.
Kamal, unfortunately we've run out of time, and I'll start getting signals in a moment to say get out of the hall. I'd just like to end this session, which I thought was a very rich, and I'd have to say tentatively optimistic session. I want to first of all leave a question hanging in the air. We didn't get round to it, but it is a question which certainly intrigues me, and that is there's a ghost at the feast here. Where is China? China is arguably the biggest beneficiary of an open world trading system, and would be or could be the most significant victim of a move to a more protectionist environment and a move backwards. So where is China, and why is China not more apparently actively engaged? I think I heard three things which made me, at the margin, optimistic. And I'm an optimist by nature, so I'm looking for things to be optimistic by. One was the description of 2008 as being representing a window of necessity. If it doesn't happen in 2008, it doesn't happen. Now, we said that in 2007 and we said that in 2006, but not quite with the same degree of sharpness and, I think, unanimity that I've heard here this afternoon. The second is the state of the world economy. And even though there seems, and certainly I've picked up in the last 3 or 4 days around Davos, I describe it as the east or west of Frankfurt split. If you're west of Frankfurt, you're a bit disillusioned and depressed. If you're east of Frankfurt, you're a bit puzzled as to why all the problems are there. So that for me is something which I think will bring a focus to this, that the world, we know it can't afford to go backwards, but in this year of all years, in which there are, and I personally believe we haven't yet seen the end of some of the issues which are confronting and destabilizing the global economy. And there is this threat of failure, and everybody's recognized in a way that which perhaps they hadn't recognized before, that it's not just you fail, and that was a pity. You fail, and you go back. And I think that realization is much sharper now. And I have a last reason for hope. I know that this very distinguished panel, and some of their other colleagues, have no intention of being the group who go down in history as having failed the world at its moment of need. Thank you very much.